house needs painting, grass needs mowing, where's he at?
Hi, this is Hank. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me your name and your number and I'll get back to you.
He's gone fishing.
Welcome to Off the Water with Hank Parker. I'm your co-host, SaraBeth, and this is your host, Hank Parker.
Woo, SaraBeth, you did good, man. I like that. I don't have to worry about getting it wrong.
There you go.
You got it all for me, so I don't have to get corrected. So it's going to be a good day. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. I've been reading some of the response that we get, and I'm sure appreciative. Our podcast is growing. We've got a lot more followers, and so we appreciate you joining in. Click like or whatever it is you do. I don't know any of this stuff. You know, all this is new to me. I'm just an old television guy, but I've enjoyed doing the podcast, and you can tell I like to talk. So we got a lot of ground to cover today. So SaraBeth, tell us what we're doing.
All right. Well, we've had a few questions. You didn't really go into detail about the Bassmaster Classic and the rules that they had, like the type of rods and reels you're allowed to have and how much tackle. Can you go into more detail?
I read some of that, and people say, you skipped over so much, you kind of lost us. So go back and build that foundation a little bit. You say you were there at the beginning, and you couldn't have been there at the beginning because you wasn't old enough. I was there at the beginning reading about it on Bassmaster magazine and trying to catch up with what was going on. I was fascinated with the sport of fishing, but no, I was not old enough to participate in the Beaver Lake tournament. But I learned all about Ray Scott. So here's how I had Bill Dance on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, and Bill and I have been friends forever, and I've heard Ray Scott stories for my whole adult life anyway. And I once spent 4 days in a adobe house in Mexico with Ray. We were there on a deer hunt, and it rained us in. You couldn't even go outside because the mud would sink up to your knees. There was no bottom to the soil. So Ray and I was stuck in the same house for 4 days with no newspaper, no cell phone, no TV, no anything. And so just Ray and I heard every Ray Scott story. I heard all about his dreams, heard about how he built bass. So I heard it straight from the horse's mouth. And so I know the sport. I know how it all began. I know the dreams. Ray was in the insurance business and had this dream about organizing bass fishing, loved the sport. And so that's where the whole thing was birthed in Ray Scott's mind. And I talked to Bobby Murray on a podcast early on, who won the first Bassmaster Classic, if you didn't know that. Bobby was telling me there was some other tournaments around the country before Ray started the tournament at Beaver Lake in 1967, I guess. So there was a lot to the sport. So I'm going to go back, and people say, well, reiterate that about getting on an airplane and not knowing where they're going, and rods and reels, how many rods and how many spinning and how many casting, and what kind of tackle were they allowed to bring, how many crankbaits, and tell us all about that, because we don't understand where that came from. All right, let me go back and tell the story from the beginning the best I can. Ray had a dream of organized bass fishing. He put the first tournament on in Arkansas on Beaver Lake. From there, he grew this thing into a whole series of tournaments where you would qualify. He'd have 250 contestants, or as many as he could get in those days. Now, as time went on, you had to get your money in to Bass the day they announced the tournament schedule, or you're going to be on a waiting list. And if you waited 2 days, you would be on a list that you would never get called. The demand grew unbelievably. So in the early days, he would have as many contestants as he could. 250 eventually became a full field. I think at Lake Seminole once, they had like 400 entries. And that's where Ray said, we got to cut this thing off at 250. It's out of control. So the 250 became the number. I'm not sure in those first few years if there was a limit. He would just get all the fishermen he could get to get involved. And then the top 25 qualified for the Bassmaster Classic. So in 1970, all these guys are competing, and the top 25 get to go to the Bassmaster Classic. That was huge. That was a big, big deal. So that's where it was birthed. The first classic, as we talked with Bobby Murray, was on Lake Mead. That's in Nevada, right out of Las Vegas. All these fishermen were from mainly the East Coast and from the South. So nobody had ever been to Lake Mead. Most of the guys that fished in that event had never even heard of Lake Mead, the vast majority. So how did they end up going to Lake Mead? Only Ray knows how he put that together with the Department of Tourism of Nevada and the Chamber of Commerce in Vegas. I don't have a clue how he did that, but that's where they went. So now you got the top 25 fishermen in the country. There was no regulations on spinning rods or casting rods. You were allowed to bring 5 rods and reels, period. Those were your choice. 5 rods and reels. You were allowed to bring 10 pounds of tackle. There were no restrictions on spinner baits, crankbaits, plastic worms, none of that. You assembled your tackle box with 10 pounds of tackle. Now, later on, they had an official tackle box, a Plano 777, and you put it in that tackle box. But in the early tournaments, you brought your tackle, and they weighed it individually, and you could not have but 10 pounds. Didn't matter what it was, 10 pounds of tackle. 5 rods and reels. That's it. So then you get on the airplane. They met in Atlanta, Georgia. They got on the airplane. I believe it was a Delta flight. And they get up in the air. And when the pilot says, okay, you're free to move around the cabin, so you can, the seatbelt sign is off, Ray would pass out an envelope. And you open that envelope and it tells you the lake you're going to. Well, they read Lake Mead in Nevada. You can only imagine what went through the mind. What in the world, man? That is the Grand Canyon been dammed up. That water's 500 feet deep. You know, I've been fishing Santee Cooper where the average water depth's 8 feet. What in the world? So you can only imagine what was going through the minds of these guys. I mean, that's crazy. But Ray did that, I think, for the first 3 classics. And then Dance, who was a smart guy, he figured out how to find out. He'd get the date of the classic, and he'd call all these hotels around all these big lakes, and he found out where the classic was going to be. Well, Ray said, we can't have that. We're not going to have anybody to have an advantage over anybody else because there were no restrictions or no off limits. If you found out where the classic was, you could go there and fish because it was a secret. And so there were no off limits. So they didn't say, hey, you can't go fish Ross Barnett for a month as they did when I qualified for the classic. It's off limits. No, they didn't do that. So Ray wasn't going to let anybody have an advantage. So once they figured out how to determine where the classic was going to be, Ray said, okay, there'll be no more of that. We're going to announce it in advance. And that way, everybody will be on a level playing field. And we'll put a cutoff period of time where you can't go on the water. So that's what they did. So that's why that happened. People ask me all the time, well, why do you think they did away with that?
So it's Bill Dance's fault.
Let's blame it on Dance.
It's Bill Dance's fault.
There's a lot of Roland Martin rules. There's 1 or 2 Hank Parker rules, but
I think there's a few.
I think there are more Roland Martin rules than there are anybody else's rules. But I think that was the Bill Dance rule.
I'd say so. That's pretty smart, though.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have bought the call the hotels.
He just he looked at all the big lakes and he'd say, I'm going to call and see if we can get Oh, no, you can't get reservation that time. We got a big event taking on. Okay. So
that's hilarious.
Dance figured it out. So once that happened, Ray said, okay, we can't have that. So it changed everything. But, that was pretty exciting. I like that. I did not get to participate in that. But I think that would have been really, really fun. It didn't work out to continue because Dance, he rained on Ray's party. Can you imagine? Bill, come on, Bill. But that's how it all started. And so the 5 rods and reels, the 10 pounds of tackle continued, gosh, I guess my whole career. I believe it was for my entire career. I think in 1989 when I retired, I think you could still only bring 5 rods and reels to the Classic and 10 pounds of tackle. I know in 1979, a couple of things happened. I was a big spinnerbait fisherman. And so I brought 3 spinnerbait rods, 1 spinning rod, and 1 flipping stick. And I brought my 10 pounds of tackle. Now, a 777 tackle box, they weighed the same, and they would mail them out to you, and they'd put your name on it, Hank Parker, Bassmaster Classic. And so I was allowed to put 10 pound tackle in it. And these guys that were smarter than me, you know, they had precision scales. They would go to, or they either owned or would go to a grocery store, to a produce or a meat counter where they had a scale that was extremely accurate. I'm just weighing mine on bathroom scales. And so when I got to Lake Texoma, I had 11.5 pounds of tackle. Well, they have a weigh-in. You have one practice day, and at the end of that practice day, you weigh your tackle box in. So I weighed my tackle box in, and I was 1.5 pounds over. Well, in those days, you know, Big O's, hand-carved baits, I'd have a few of those in there, and they were worth $150 to $200. So they only weigh an ounce or less. And so Ray and Harold Sharp was the tournament director. They go through your tackle box and take out whatever they want because you're not getting them back. This becomes BASS, Ray and Harold Sharp's property. So they've taken all these cool baits and they took out, and then they got them on they got my tackle box on the scale. So every time they'd take a bait out, the weight would change. And finally, Ray felt sorry for me. He was taking everything I had. He reached down in the bottom and he grabbed a big pack of motor oil jelly worms, and he took them. Well, when he did, the scales went to 9 pounds.
Under.
Yeah. So now they said, okay, he's going to give me some baits back. I said, whoa. You chose the baits you took away from me to get my weight right. So you took too much. Now I should be able to choose the baits I want back. And he and Harold talked for a minute, and Ray agreed. Okay, that's fair. So they actually took the baits that I won the Classic on. And I got to take them back because they took too many. I didn't get them all back, but I got the majority of them until we got the tackle box to exactly 10 pounds and I was legal. But he took the baits that I won the Classic on, and I got to take them back. And I thought that was a pretty good story, pretty cool. But that was in 1979. By this time, and I've told this before, but I want to reiterate, the Bassmaster Classic was a televised deal. I remember the first one at Lake Mead. I remember they had inboard, outboard Rebel bass boats because that's when Ranger Boat Company burned down. Every year after that, until long after I retired, it was all exclusive Ranger Boat Classic boats. And so Ray had all this arranged with the Department of Tourism from Nevada. They had all the television cameras, Victory Films out of Charlotte, North Carolina. They filmed. It was before video. They filmed all of this and made unbelievable television. And we got to watch it. But the weigh-in, there was no pageantry. They weighed in on the boat dock at Lake Mead. They had scales set up on the boat dock. Couldn't have been 20 spectators. Maybe the wives, maybe a dad or mom, immediate family, that's it.
Was this before or after the whole ordeal with them leaving the fish out and then them ended up weighing less? You know what I'm talking about? With the lights and everything else, do you think that might have played a factor? Well,
in those days, there was no catch and release.
Okay.
In those days, they gave the Boy Scouts, or there were some programs, some parts of the country had a kind of feed the hungry program. that they donated the fish to a worthy cause, but they killed all those fish in the early days. And that's when they started to recognize, man, we got to quit doing this. Not because our little group is depleting the resources of the lake, because of the influence that we have on all the other fishermen around the country. We're setting a precedent that taking these fish out of the lake is okay.
Then everybody else started to do it.
And so it's not okay. But remember, when all of this started, it was commonplace that the only reason you went to fish was to catch what people would say a mess of fish for dinner. That's why you went. So catch and release was not on anybody's radar screen. How ridiculous would that be? To catch fish, go out there and spend all that money and all that time and catch fish and throw them back in the water? Are you crazy? I'm going to take them home, man. That's what we're going to have for dinner tonight. And so Ray recognized, hey, man, we're killing our catch, and we're teaching everybody in the world that that's okay and that's what you ought to do. But that's all anybody had ever done. So Ray had the insight to see that his influence and the influence of these guys that are fishing this BASS, which stands for Bass Angler Sportsman Society, they got a lot of influence in the marketplace. So we need to be more responsible. So Forrest Wood at Ranger Boats built the first aerated working live well where you could put fish in, turn on an aerator, and keep them alive and bring them to the scales and then release them. So it was pretty cool. But in that early days, I remember Bobby Murray. I remember that big string of fish, dead or a doornail, on a stringer. You know, they hooked them up on a stringer. And just like you would if you were catching fish to take home to eat for dinner. So all of that is how this whole crazy thing of competitive bass fishing started. And there's been a lot of people that have been credited for making all of this stuff come together. But the whole thing goes back to Ray Scott. Ray is the man that built the foundation. He partnered up with Forrest Wood, who Forrest saw the potential to build the notoriety for Ranger Boats. And Forrest paired up with Ray. And he supported Ray in a way that they gave away Ranger Boats at the tournaments. Ranger Boats were the official Bassmaster Classic boats. Forrest, alongside of Ray, teamed up to make this sport grow. And it went from as many people as you could get to enter a tournament. It might be 50, it might be 100, might be 300. Like at Seminole, the one time, they had like 400 contestants, and that's when they cut it to 250, and that was the max. So it stayed at 250. When I started in 1978, when you entered the tournament, it was cut off at 250. Didn't matter if 500 guys applied, only 250 got in. There was no qualifying points like now you qualify for the Elite Series. There was none of that. It was the first 250 guys that got their money in at Bass that entered. You called the minute they announced it's open, you got on the telephone, and sometimes you'd wait. You'd be on hold for 2 hours. And you would tell them, I want to fish them all. Here's my credit card number. And you were in. If you missed that, I remember once Tom Mann, who had fished all the tournaments for years and years, he was late one year. He missed 3 tournaments. He didn't get in.
Wow.
And there he had been a supporter of bass. He'd been in all the tournaments, but because he was late, he didn't get in. Tom missed 3 tournaments one year. And I think that was in like 80 or 81. Wow. Tragic. But There was no favoritism. It didn't matter if you was Rick Clunn. It didn't matter if you was Roland Martin. It didn't matter if you was Tom Mann. If you didn't get entered in line in that first 250, you didn't get in. So that changed. After a while, he would give the top 100 guys opportunity to just say, I'm in, or renew. And you could hold your place. You didn't have to wait on the telephone. You could tell them before the schedule ever came out, hey, Ray, I'm fishing next year. Okay, Hank Parker is fishing next year. Let's put him down. So that happened probably about 82 or 83 maybe.
Pre-registering a year out.
Yeah, you could. All you had to do before, you had to wait till the schedule was announced, and then you had to enter. If you missed it, you missed it, and there wasn't anything you could do about it. So that was a big deal. So about 85, I think maybe they said, okay, if you commit in advance, you won't have to wait on the schedule. You won't have to wait online. So
something that's I've just been kind of mulling over as you've been talking when you're talking about the switch between bringing in your catch dead and then bringing them in alive. Did you see people cheat more when the fish were dead? I saw a video the other day of 2 contestants that got disqualified. They had live bass and they shoved weights down their mouths, and so there were lead weights in the bottom of the fish. They had to cut them open because they were like, something's not right with this fish.
That was actually not bass. That was walleye.
Oh, that was walleye?
Yeah,
okay.
And that was a big stink. Ray Scott, everybody in the world assumed fishermen all lie. They embellish. And so everybody assumed there's no way you're going to have a tournament that people are not going to cheat. So that stigma followed the sport, and Ray hated that. So Ray made a rule: if you cheat, you're permanently disqualified. We're going to sue you, we're going to take you to court, and we're going to permanently disqualify. If you get caught cheating, you will never, ever fish another tournament. And if we can have you put in prison, we're going to have you put in prison. We will not tolerate cheating. I mean, and the fear of the Lord was put in you because Ray, boy, he wanted to catch somebody all the time. So he policed every little thing. So when you ask me, if dead or alive, did I think there were more cheating? I don't think there was any cheating. You fished the way it worked. You drew a partner, another contestant. So it was a check and balance. And just like in PGA golf, you're paired up with a guy, you sign that scorecard. At the end of the day, you're signing a scorecard that contestant abided by all the rules. And if you signed that guy's scorecard and it was later discovered that he violated a rule and you signed his card, you were permanently disqualified. You both are out of the game. So it was no cheating. I don't feel like there were very few people in the early days that tried to cheat. There was one gentleman, and I won't call his name out of respect. I loved his son. His son got blackballed as a result of it. But it happened on Clarks Hill Reservoir, and he cheated and got caught. Ray ruined his name, dragged him through the mud. It was awful. He did something wrong, but there was no repenting or forgiveness. It was over with Ray. So cheating was something that didn't take place, and Ray would not allow it. He policed every little thing. That's why when they made a rule that you cannot talk to anybody or get any information on a lake 30 days prior to the event, I hated that rule. And I called Ray and I told him, I said, I don't like that rule, Ray, because you can't police that. There's no way you can police that. So what that's going to do is the honest guys are going to get penalized, because there are going to be some guys that are going to violate that rule, and there's no way you can't catch them. If this guy calls up and he gets information, you'll never know that. But I'm not going to do it because it's a rule. Right. Larry Nixon's not going to do it because it's a rule. Bo Dowden's not going to do it because it's a rule. George Cochran's not going to do it. But there are others that they're going to bend every rule and push it. And if it's a rule where you can't get caught, There's some guys going to push that. So I hated rules that could not be policed. He could enforce them if he caught them, but how in the world are you going to catch somebody doing that? So I didn't like that. So Ray was real careful not to do much of that. He was real careful not to make rules that they couldn't police. But he made a few that I didn't like, but it was okay. I understand what they were trying to achieve, and it all worked out. But from those early days, it started. And then in 1980, ABC came to New York, to Alexandria Bay, New York, set up headquarters, and ABC's 2020 televised the Bassmaster Classic. Now, it started out just a bunch of rednecks with 9 horsepower, tiller handles. Now they're running bass boats that look like my Ranger that I got sitting here in front of me today. I mean, we got slick rigs and got troll motors that are guided by foot pedals. All this technology has come to play, and now ABC's 2020 is televising a Bassmaster Classic. Then in 1981, they had the first indoor weigh-in. That was on the Alabama River. It was in Ray Scott's hometown of Montgomery, Alabama, and they weighed in the Coliseum downtown Montgomery, coming off the Arkansas River. No, the Alabama River, coming off the Alabama River, right there in Montgomery. And first indoor weigh-in had like 5,000 or 6,000 people there. They built an outdoor show around it where they put fishing tackle on display and boats on display and drew all these people in. Then the next year it was again, they did a repeat. Stanley Mitchell won the first one. Paul Elias won the second one on the Alabama River in Montgomery. And they had, when Paul won it, they had like 10,000 people come to watch the weigh-in. Can you imagine going from a Bassmaster Classic, the first one at Lake Mead, and there may have been 30 spectators on the boat dock watching Bobby Murray win the Classic, to going to last year in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 50,000 plus people watching the weigh-in. I mean, that's crazy how that sport has grown. But the foundation that it was built on, they gravitated, they got away from killing the fish. Forrest built the live wells, and they made it a rule that you had to bring your fish in alive. And if your fish died, you got a penalty. A 2-ounce penalty, then it went to a 4-ounce penalty. I think now it may be an 8-ounce penalty for a dead fish. And how many tournaments? I won one by 2 ounces, and I lost 2 major tournaments by 1 ounce. So one dead fish, and if Gary Klein would have had a dead fish at the Super Bass, I'd have won the Super Bass tournament in 1984 on Lake Lanier.
Wow.
Had Denny Breyer had a dead fish in the Superstar tournament in Illinois, I would have won the Superstar tournament. Right. I won every event Bass ever had. And then they started, after I retired, they started the Superstar event. Superstar was they took every Angler of the Year from the past and every Bassmaster Classic from the past and every current winner for that year. And they would bring them together, and it was on the Illinois River. You could not get any information from anybody. You could not pre-fish. It was an open event. The first year, I lost by 1 ounce. Denny Breyer beat me. Had I won that, then I would have won everything Bass ever had. Cool, but I missed it by 1 ounce. So I wish Denny would have had a dead fish.
Well, you talk about the rules. How do they differ back then from today? How much has changed?
There's been a lot of rule changes as time has gone on. If you run a no-wake zone, you get disqualified. When I was fishing, everybody ran no-wake zones. Everybody pushed it to the limit and tried to get as much out of a day's time that you could. So they started making rules that if you do this, they had a rule where you couldn't fish within 50 yards of a gas pump. And I guess to keep from jamming up people that were trying to get in there to buy gas, or there had some marinas on some of the TVA lakes where people at the marinas had pet bass. They didn't want you fishing for them, so you couldn't fish within so many feet of the gas pump. Just hard things, you know. I mean, you go in there and you're fishing and your hair's on fire, you know. You're trying to take advantage of every second you look up there at the gas pump. Now you have to turn yourself in.
Oh.
Then if you made that mistake, you just eased on out there, hope your partner didn't see it and hope he didn't turn you in. And so I took a lot of polygraph tests, and twice in my career, I looked up there with a gas pump, and I don't know if I was within 50 yards. I might have been 40 yards. I might have been 20 yards. I might have been 60 yards. I don't know. But I didn't go turn myself in, and maybe I should have. I don't know. But now that's a rule. If you violate, even if you didn't realize it, if you all of a sudden you realize it, then you got to turn yourself in.
You monster. You caught some poor little girl's pet bass over there by that gas pump.
Mm-hmm. But I let it go, and so it swam back home safe and sound, like Finding Nemo.
Finding Nemo. That's funny.
Well, am I talking or you talking?
Well, I'm
all right.
I'm just letting you talk. You
okay.
Well,
I just thought you might want to add to Finding Nemo there.
I think you covered it. I mean, I'm just imagining, how do you have a pet bass?
Oh man, they feed them. You know, the minnows. They saw minnows, and they would take the minnows that were weak, and they would feed them to the bass. And so they got to where they just stay around, and they didn't want you fishing for the pet bass. So that was a rule that was put in place. So I think that rule's gone. It should be gone. And so now we go back, and here we build this foundation. And so the sport has grown from 20 people on a boat dock to 50,000 people coming to the weigh-ins. The influence that professional fishermen had in the early days, as far as the fishing industry was concerned, with the exception of Forrest Wood and maybe a handful of others, nobody recognized that. Mm. So all the money that was spent in marketing was on magazine and newspaper ads that had to do with the lure, not a personality. They didn't have Bobby Murray holding up a Zorro spinnerbait that Stan Sloan developed and said, hey, I won the Bassmaster Classic on this Zorro spinnerbait. You need one of these. There was none of that. Mm. That all came with time. And Bill Dance was probably the most responsible person for all of that transpiring, going from outdoor rider influence to professional fisherman. Dance was pretty bold. He was very accomplished, and he was extremely knowledgeable. Dance has always been one of the slogans that he has, teaching America to fish. And that was important to him. So he started all this endorsement opportunity, which a lot of people were critical of Christians fishing bass tournaments. They said, well, you ain't doing nothing but legalize gambling. You're putting up your money, and you're taking 50% of the purse if you win. So all you're doing is throwing money in a pool, and you're gambling. There was some validity to that, perhaps, but you could not make a living off of what you won. Some people could do pretty good for a year or two, but in the long haul, to say that I'm going to make a living fishing by winning other people's money, it was about sponsors. It was about the opportunity to endorse a product and get some revenue back. Still there today. It's the only way that it works. You may have a couple of good years, and you may have a couple of drought years, and then you may have a couple of mediocre years. But to be able to take all the expenses that are involved and make a living, it was tough then, it's tough now. So you got to have sponsors. So Dance got that started. Dance was the guy that was charismatic, influential, knowledgeable, and he learned how to parlay his notoriety and his influence working with different sponsors. Cordell, Bill's worked with everybody over the years. I mean, everybody. So he was able to get himself in a position that he could endorse product. And that opened the door for people like myself. That opened the door for lots and lots of fishermen that are out there today that are able to get sponsors to make a living. And all of that just gravitated from that dream. It started at Beaver Lake to the first Classic, to the second Classic, and on down the line. And I remember when Tommy Martin won the Bassmaster Classic in 1984. I think it was on, no, wasn't Percy Priest. I think Don Butler won that. I'm not sure where Tommy won the 74 Classic. I should know. But anyway, he won it on a flex spinnerbait. And it was the first time I remember opening up a Bassmaster magazine and seeing a Bassmaster Classic winner holding a trophy in one hand and a bait in another hand, endorsing it. And wow. Buddy, it started. That was the beginning of the flood. Every time somebody won a Classic, you wanted that person to promote and market the particular bait that he won the Classic on.
Oh yeah, because we'll start selling like hotcakes. Say, oh well, if you won this tournament on this bait, let me go get some. That opened the floodgate. I think 1974 was the year that began, and it made an opportunity for everybody. So when I began my career, the whole method of madness was figuring out how to get sponsors. And in order to be productive, you've got to put yourself in a position. If a company decides, okay, I'm going to pay Hank Parker $10,000 this year to endorse my lure, I've got to sell enough lures to offset his investment, or I'm a liability. And if I can do a lot more and sell and justify a raise for the next year. And that was your objective. I worked for Bill Norman Lure Company, and I went to work for Bill Norman for almost nothing. And man, I doubled his business within probably 2 years. So he was willing to offer me more money because I was justifying that by using my influence to help his sales increase. And that was the whole point. You know, you go to these high school fishing. That's how Huckleberry Apparel got started in the fundraiser. You go to every one of these fishing high schools and you talk to these kids. Well, they couldn't wait for you to give them an opportunity to ask you a question. And every time the question is, Mr. Hank, how do we get sponsors? We need sponsors. We don't have enough money to have our tournaments and supply the money necessary for the gasoline for the boater. Yeah.
You know, they go to these bass clubs and the boater would say, all right, I'll come help you, but you got to provide my truck fuel and my boat fuel. Well, they didn't have enough money. So how do we get sponsors? And I said, well, wait a minute. Let me tell you something. You're asking for a sponsor, but you're really asking for a handout, because let me tell you how sponsorships work. Sponsorships work by you having enough influence that you justify sales for the amount of money they're paying you. So you high school guys, you don't have any national influence. You're regional. Maybe in Union, South Carolina, the high school fishing team could have enough influence to influence somebody to go to Keepsake Jewelers and buy a watch, or go to Pizza Hut and buy a pizza, or go to Napa and buy auto parts. Maybe. But to have influence to say, okay, Luz, we want you to give us enough money to pay our boaters. Well, how much money is that? $6,000. There's no way that the Union High School fishing team is going to justify that $6,000 from lose. So it don't work. The math don't work. So I'm telling these high schools, I said, no, you don't understand sponsorship. What you're asking for is free money. You're asking for a handout. Well, we're the future of the sport. Without us, that's true. But the sport needs you, but you need the sport. So in order for you to be able to have the opportunity to make money, you need not a sponsor, but you need a partner to come alongside of you and offer a fundraising opportunity that would make sense for all parties involved.
Right. Help me to help you.
Help me to help you. Exactly. So that's where Huckleberry came in. And I went to Danny Bennett. I went to so many different companies trying to get them involved. And no one would step up to the plate and make the capital investment necessary to make it happen until I met Danny. And Danny said, yes, I'm willing to take that risk and take that chance. Now, we got to sign up enough teams to justify it, which we're in the process of doing. But now these teams, and the idea came to me because the bands, high school bands, did this 50 years ago by selling the world's finest chocolate bar. And so the bands would raise money. They would sell donuts. Krispy Kreme had a donut program. They could sell donuts and get proceeds and take that money and be able to travel to go play in this parade or at this event off of school property. So they didn't get revenue from the county or the state for their band program. They had to generate their own revenue. Well, these fishermen are in the same boat. So I just took that blueprint. Well, they're not going to make enough money selling donuts or candy. They need significant money. So when they sell a hat, they make $10. They make 30% of whatever they sell throughout that Huckleberry catalog. And that catalog has apparel for grandmas, aunts, uncles, kids, adults. It's not just fishing apparel. It's all kind of casual wear, sporting wear. So it makes perfect sense. And so now these kids can realize, one, so many of our kids feel like that they're entitled to something. Well, we're the future of fishing, so people ought to give us money. Well, no, I don't think anybody needs to give you money. I think they give you an opportunity to earn money. And if you're willing to work, there's a lot of lessons in that, and you can learn a lot from that. So the Huckleberry opportunity is twofold. One, it gives these kids an opportunity to learn how to work and also learn a lesson that you get what you work for. There is no handout. There's no free lunch there. And if whatever you get for free, you take advantage of or you take for granted, you don't appreciate. These kids go out and work and they earn enough money to pay all their non-boaters or their boaters or their captains. Then they've achieved something. They got to feel good about that. So it's a good program, and that's how it all came together. So sponsorship is a whole different world. That's what professional fishermen get themselves in a position to earn. Brian Thrift from Shelby, North Carolina, awesome angler that he liked to fish a bladed jig. So he's so good with a bladed jig. He won so many events. He's got notoriety. He justified sponsorship from a company that makes a jig, a bladed jig. And so it makes sense. Hey, Thrift's awesome. He catches a ton of fish. His influence, and he can tell you the reason I use this bait is for this reason, this reason, this reason. And if he's honest and that consumer buys that product and it does what Thrift says it'll do, then he's established credibility that the next time he tells you about a lure, you're quick to go out and buy it because he was honest with you to begin with. Right. That was my whole platform. I worked for so many companies that they would come out with a product and they say, we need you to endorse it. And I would use it and it wouldn't live up to the reputation. It wouldn't do what they were saying to do. It was not a great value. And I got fired. I got fired from a very, very, very important company that I had a lot of deep roots with. And I refused to endorse it because it did not do what they said it was going to do. And I just couldn't feel good about that, because in fishing, you are your own commodity. If I tell you something and I believe that, and I sell you on it, and you buy it and you say, he lied to me, this ain't nothing but junk, this thing doesn't do at all what he says it's going to do, then the next time I say something, I done fell for that one time, I'm not buying his stuff, then I'm dead. I'm no longer of value to that sponsor. So they're going to cut me off because I'm not influencing their sales. And I can't repackage. Again, I'm my own commodity. I can't come out with a new, improved Hank Parker model. I am what I am. And my credibility is all contingent upon my reliability and my honesty and my integrity. So there were a lot of fishermen that got sponsors that would say anything for $1. I mean, they'd promise you, if you bought this lure, all you got to do is open it up and the fish are going to jump in the boat trying to take it out of your hand and you'll have a boatload of fish. I mean, just overstating what the product would do. Now, I'm not saying that I never made some bold statements and I'm never sensationalized. The problem with marketing and advertising today, everybody sensationalizes over the top. I endorsed a product that I bought that I ended up owning, Khmer Deer, which is an incredible product. And for years, I never had one disappointing moment. I never had it not perform. But I had people that would buy it, would write me letters, and they say, it's the greatest stuff in the world. Man, this stuff is remarkable. Then I'd turn around and from the same region of the country, I'd get a letter saying, you ripped me off, this stuff doesn't work. And it was very frustrating for me. And I thought, I can't believe these guys don't even know how to apply it, because you get results every time. I never not had results. Then all of a sudden I get myself in a situation where it didn't seem to work. And I thought, ooh, no, I've overstated. I've overstated. And so I had to kind of police myself and go back and see where there was opportunity for something to not perform up to what I drew it up to be, what I forecast it would do. Sometimes it won't do that. So I had to rethink how I position. I've done that same thing in fishing. I've realized that there are situations where I said this bait is foolproof, and maybe it wasn't. So you got to be careful not to overstate, but yet you have to sensationalize something because everybody else is doing it. And so you're forced to be right on that edge. But if you go too far, you lose all credibility, and then your brand is dead. And I am my own brand. Right. So it's a hard line to have sponsors, keep them happy, and maintain your integrity with the consumer himself. I've been very, very fortunate in my career to work with companies that have allowed me the liberties to be myself and not get sucked in to having to make statements that I don't believe or that are so far over the top that they're embellished too far. And I'm not sitting here saying I haven't embellished. I'm not saying I haven't sensationalized things. When I believe something, I believe it strong and hard. And I test things. I'm doing things now with luge rods. I've been working with luge rods for 3 years because I don't think that luge themselves have positioned their rod on the same level they've positioned their reel. Part of that is because you can take a reel and you can easily discern that, man, this thing is awesome. You can cast it. You can feel it. It's a BB1 Pro I use a lot. It's like a Mercedes-Benz. Man, it's got to turn that hand. It's just solid. It's like shutting the door on a Mercedes. You can just feel the quality. It's easy for the consumer to understand that. So luge will make a statement about that reel and feel really good about it and market it, and everybody buys in. On the other hand, a fishing rod is harder for the average consumer to discern the benefit of that rod. So it's a bit risky to make a statement. So I've been encouraging Lew's to be more aggressive because I think they got the greatest fishing rods in the world. So I've been pushing them to be more aggressive with marketing their rods. And it's a risk on my part because I've taken ownership in that. I said, okay, let me go fish with Zona. Let me fish with Van Dam. Let me fish with Andy Montgomery. Let me fish with Wally Marshall. Let me fish with Greg Hackney. Let me fish with Mark Rose. Let me fish with all these guys that have these special rods, and let them explain to the consumer how they designed this rod. They said, okay, you take ownership in that. This will all be hosted by you. You go fish with Van Dam. You go fish with Zona. You go fish with Montgomery. You go fish with Greg Hackney. You go fish with all these guys, and you come back and you point out the benefit of those rods. I said, hey, I'll take ownership in that. So I'm taking a risk. If it works, then I'm going to look really good with Lew's. If it doesn't work, I'll probably be fired. I'll probably be out the door. So the more risk you take in the sponsor world, the more reward if it works. But the bad part about it is if you can't deliver what you promise, you lose confidence. The consumer lose confidence in you. You shot your integrity, you're done.
Yeah, your worth is down. No, but nobody's going to believe anything you're selling them.
That's right.
Well, circling back to the Bassmaster Classic, what is something you would change about today's Classic? Whether it's bringing back something from your era or maybe changing something that they do altogether.
The Classic went downhill from my perspective when Ray left the stage. There was something so special. You look at late night television, and as far as I'm concerned, there has never been a host of late night television like Johnny Carson. The Johnny Carson show, he was such a master at the way he hosted that late night television. So was Ray. Ray was a Johnny Carson. He was just a master on stage. And when I was the guy that replaced Ray, I was the first person to ever MC a Bassmaster Classic other than Ray Scott. Now you put that pair of shoes on. I knew that was a disaster from the beginning, but Helen Sevier and all the people at Bass had been really good to me. Hank Parker Jr. I owned a race team, and Bass went with Kmart to sponsor the race car. And Ray and Helen had a contract dispute, and Helen was the owner of Bass, and Ray sold it to Helen, and he was under contract. They had a dispute, and so in 1998, for the first time in the history of Bass, Ray Scott did not MC the Classic. It was in Greensboro, North Carolina. I MC'd the Bassmaster Classic. What a disaster. It was the most difficult job I ever had. I knew before I ever did it, it was going to be tough. Somebody had to do it. Helen asked me to do it. They had been really good to me. I could not say no, knowing all along it was not something I wanted to do.
I know you were sweating it. Did they ever say why you out of everybody else?
I don't really know. I guess that should have been flattery to me that they had enough respect out of all the fishermen in the history of the sport that they would call on me to do it. So I guess that was flattery. I had done everything. I'd always been loyal to Bass. I was Ray's friend. It was just a tough situation to be in, and I emceed it at Greensboro, North Carolina, in 1988. In 98, and then in 99, Denny Breyer won it the first year in Greensboro. Then in 99, it was in New Orleans on the Delta there in New Orleans. and Davy Height won. And then in 2000, it was in Chicago, and Woo Daves won.
Mm-hmm.
I emceed those 3 classics. The 2000 was a disaster. It was not well attended. It was the only classic, I think, that they had difficulty filling up the Coliseum. It just didn't work in Chicago for whatever reason. I don't know why, but that was the last classic I emceed. And then after that, they started bringing in different hosts, different people to MC the classic. It's never, not when I was there, not when Fishburne was there, not when anybody has ever emceed the classic to equal Ray. And so today's Bassmaster Classic, Tommy Sanders, Davey Height, I love those guys, and Zona, they do a good job. But on stage, it seems to me like it's fake. It's too much sensational hype.
Too staged.
It's just they're trying to build too much drama in my opinion. And I know it's hard because I've been there. But it's just too much screaming, too much hollering. Ray had just a magnificent way. If you bombed, he didn't build you up, man. He said, well, that's a pretty pitiful show. And I thought, man, I expected a lot more out of you than that. Well, they don't do that now. Anybody that comes, and I didn't do it. I mean, I just wasn't comfortable doing that. So I never did that either. So if a guy came up there and bombed, I'd say, man, I know you had a tough day and you'll get them next time. You're an awesome fisherman. Just being here is a great accomplishment. We'd build them up. Ray wouldn't do that. Ray
said it how it is.
Yeah, Ray'd tell it how it is. And that made it just so much more powerful, I think. So if I could change anything, I'd resurrect Ray from the dead and bring him back and put him on stage, because I don't think the classic has ever been as powerful as it was with the showman that Ray was.
That's pretty awesome. Well, I think that about wraps up today's episode, don't you think?
Well, it was a lot of rambling, and I tried to tell the story, probably didn't do a good job again, but the foundation was a few people on a boat dock at a weigh-in, and now it's 100,000 people in a Coliseum with a sports show built around it. And it's pretty special to where it's come, where it is, and where it's come from. Mm-hmm. So it's exciting to be a part of it, and I've been a part of it for a long time, and I hope I'm a part of it for a long time to come.
Well, we'll see where it goes in the future.
Yes, sir.
Make sure you check out Huckleberry Apparel in the description down below. And the links to the high school fishing and the college fishing forums are down there.
Tell them bye, SaraBeth.
All right, bye. See you next week.
God bless you. I'll see you next week. I'm Hank Parker.